The next one is Beethoven's Sonata in F sharp major. And this is a unique and wonderful sonata for quite a few reasons. The sonata that came before it in Beethoven's books was actually F minor, the Appassionata, which was definitely a pinnacle of his passionate writing, definitely just a masterpiece in the sort of earth-shaking immensity of it, and then he puts down his piano sonata pen for a few years. Well, he does continue to write in other genres, but I feel he kind of has the idea, quit while you're ahead, But it's only, almost 5 years when he picks up the pen again and comes up with this incredible piece, the F sharp major sonata, which is only 2 movements long. That's a rare thing about it. Very few of Beethoven's sonatas have only 2 movements. And even more unique is the key, F sharp major. It's actually the only piano sonata by Beethoven in F sharp major. Not even any of his violin sonatas or cello sonatas are in that key. So I think this might tell us something about what he's doing with this piece. It was dedicated to Teresa von Brunswick, who was one of the daughters in a family he was quite close with. And it's quite clear that he must have had some romantic feelings towards this girl, not just because of the incredibly loving character of the piece, but I think that those scholars who hypothesize that Teresa might have been the immortal beloved whom he writes about, I think the key, F sharp major, how unique that is, I think I would choose F sharp major if I was writing for the beloved who I think is immortal, I think it's a good case for Teresa being the mysterious one. So, yeah, I'm telling you how loving it is. The first movement is it's clear from the very first chord, from the first 4-bar introduction, that this is the most wonderful expression of love. It's like a portal into a heavenly world. And then when we step into the rest of the movement. And then the second movement is quite contrasting to the first, but I think still within this lighthearted, poignant character. It's actually quite humorous. It's full of these questions and answers. Let me just play you one of them. The very beginning is this. So you have the funny question and answer, which comes back over and over. And the very last time, the answer isn't so lighthearted. Well, it's legato and full of this love, once again, that we heard in the very first introduction. And so I think this is sort of the injection of that love into the second movement that ties the whole piece together before we have this brilliant finish to the second movement. And Beethoven himself really loved this piece. He was kind of frustrated, I guess, that everyone was raving about his C sharp minor, the Moonlight Sonata. He says, this F sharp major one is much greater. Here we go. Now, Jean Coulthard, she was one of the three composers, all of them women, who dominated music in Western Canada during the 20th century. Coulthard was born in 1908, died in 2000, so her life really spanned the entire 20th century, pretty much. And a fascinating coincidence is that the other two women actually also died in 2000, within weeks of each other. So it's like this was a group of composers who were really meant for the 20th century. Coulthard started composing at a very young age. I think that's actually a rare thing for composers, at least nowadays. I mean, I've done some composing myself, but anyway, she started young and studied as a young woman some composing. But I think especially during that period, being a woman, it would have been very difficult to become really successful as a composer because of the prejudices and other sorts of obstacles that would have been in her way. And that's part of the reason, along with her extreme busyness as a teacher at the University of British Columbia. She started the music program there, so she's a full-time teacher, and along with being like spending a lot of time with her own kids and stuff like that, she had to fit in her composing in the other times. And anyway, so that's part of why when she was 40, that's when she started her first piano sonata. And She revised it a couple years later in 1952, so that's when this piece, the one I'm playing, was composed. I'm playing the first movement, and it's clearly in sonata form. Maybe not as clear as Beethoven, who really solidified the form, but Coulthard, you can hear all the important elements that are there. Sonata form has exposition, the first part where the themes are presented, then development, where the themes are developed and transformed, and the recapitulation, where they come back. And we hear all of these elements in the Coulthard. So listen to the very start of the piece, where there's the first theme. So just even the first 5 notes. That's the seed from which this movement comes, I think. It's 4 whole notes, and then intersected with this 5th note. Okay? And we'll show you where that comes back in different ways later on. And then there's the second theme, which is this lamenting 2-note slurs sort of thing in the lower half of the keyboard. This is the first time it comes in the dominant minor. That also will come back later on. Now let me show you where the first theme comes in the development, because this is a really good one. There's this swirling accompaniment, and we hear sort of plucked out in between it, the theme. You heard it? Yeah? Okay. And the development is this building toward the climax. It's interesting. The climax, I think, is actually the recap, the beginning of the recap, and this is how that sounds. I'd love to go on, but I'll say that. There, you heard it again. And the second theme also comes back in the recap, and then at the end of that movement, we hear this new idea, which just for a page and a half, there's this reflection on the piece so far. An interesting coda sort of thing, looking back before we get this final thunderous ending. And it's not the ending of the whole piece. There are 2 more movements. The threnody is second, and that's a deep lament. And then following that, we have the finale, which has the word resolutely, which I think is her stepping forward out of the sorrow of the threnody to finish it off. I'll just be playing the first movement, but I highly recommend listening to the rest of it and maybe some more Coulthard, because I'm sure not many of you have heard of this wonderful Canadian composer. Thank you.